This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Aget Moed. I had a ha'ara for a long time on the tefillos that we say on the Shalosh Regalim. We know the main body of Shemana Esrei, whether Shachris, Musaf, Mincha, Marev, begins on the Shalosh Regalim. Ata v'chartanu mikal ha'amim ahavta oisanu v'ratzi sabanu. We say, Rebbe Shalom, you chose us from all the nations. The Goin says that refers to Pesach, when Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim and He selected us from all the nations. Ahavta oisanu, you showed your love to us when you gave us the Torah on Har Sinai. V'ratzi sabanu, and you showed your favor to us, you showed ritzoi to us. This is when the Rebbe Shalom returned His love to us with the return of the Anani HaKavod on Sukkot after the Chet HaEgel. I always like to think that the Nusach continues, V'roimam tanu mikal ha'lashonos, you elevated us above all languages. That goes back to Pesach. One of the reasons we were taken out of Mitzrayim is Shalosh shinos l'shoinam. V'kidashtanu b'mitzvaysecha, you sanctified us with your mitzvahs. That refers back to Shavuos, when Hashem gave us the Torah mitzvahs. V'kerav malkinu l'avodah, and you brought us close to your avodah with the return of the Anani HaKavod on the Mishkan. You brought us close again to your avodah, back to Sukkot. So in other words, Ata v'chartanu mikol ha'amim, and that is further elucidated by V'roimam tanu mikol ha'lashonos. Ahavta oisanu, and that is further explained by V'kidashtanu b'mitzvaysecha. And then V'ratzi sabanu is further explained by V'kerav malkinu l'avodah. But be it as it may, according to the Vilna Gaon, the three expressions, Ata v'chartanu, Ahavta oisanu, V'ratzisa, refers to the Shalosh Regalim. So I always wondered, why mention Ata v'chartanu and Ahavta oisanu on Sukkot? Sukkot is V'ratzi sabanu. We don't mention Shabbos on Sukkot. Why mention Pesach and Shavuos on Sukkot? Why on Shavuos, which is V'kidashtanu b'mitzvaysecha, which is Ahavta oisanu, do we mention Ata b'chartanu, which is Pesach, and V'ratzi sabanu, which is Sukkot? We don't mention Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In other words, why by each one of the Shalosh Regalim, why would we mention the qualities and the benefits of the other two Regalim? It's not that Regel, it's this particular Regel. And really throughout the Nusach of the Tefillah, we refer to Shalosh Pam Bashani Yara calls the Chor Chaspnei. We refer to all of the Shalosh Regalim. So it seems to me probably a davar pashat, probably something that is a simple idea and probably has occurred to everyone. And that is, aside from the fact that we're now enjoying the Yom Tov of Pesach, and on every particular regel we're enjoying that regel, but aside from that, there's a dimension that a regel is part of the entity called Shalosh Regalim. There is a entity, there is a time, there's a type of Kedusha, a wavelength of Kedusha called Shalosh Regalim. So therefore, all the Shalosh Regalim are the same. Yes, they each have their different qualities, but they're all part of that entity called Shalosh Regalim. And it is appropriate to mention the qualities of all the Regalim by each Regel. To substantiate this idea, we know that when the Bilam was going to curse Klal Yisrael, so his donkey was not letting him, and Bilam hits the donkey, and the donkey says, are you going to uproot a nation that observes the Shalosh Regalim, the three Regalim? And that's how Rashi interprets the words of the Chamor of Bilam. So we see already in the Chumash that these holidays are called Regalim, literally legs. Why are they called legs? Rabbi Yosef Gektilia on the Shari Oira says that the Kisei HaKavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu consists of four legs: Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and David HaMelech. Likewise, that is represented and it stands on the four legs of the Regalim: Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. And David, which is, so to speak, Regel B'fnei Atzmai, corresponds to Shmini Atzeres, which is Regel B'fnei Atzmai. So again, from this idea, the depiction would be that the Regalim are three legs of one entity, though. The entity is the chair. So in other words, just to focus on the particular Regel, in a way, would be short-sighted and narrow-minded, because the purpose of the regel is to hold up the entity. So aside from focusing on, yes, this is Pesach, but Pesach is one of the amudim that holds up Hashem's presence. So we need to focus on the fact that this is not just Pesach, it is one of the important legs holding up the Kisei HaKavod, one part of the great entity of Shalosh Regalim. So I saw another substantiation of this idea, that aside from the fact that this is a Yom Tov Prati, but it's also part of the great entity, there's a very interesting shita mentioned by the Baal Tar Temimah in the Sefer Baruch Sha'amar on page Shin Lamed Tes, and also on page Mem, and he brings a tremendous chiddush, and he says, on the Shalosh Regalim we say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mikadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim. Well, says the Baruch Sha'amar of Baruch Halevi Epstein of Pinsk, he says, let me tell you something about the development of the printing press, and this is one of his very classic maneuvers or approaches, and he says that each printer was bana ba'atzma, everyone had their own enterprise, and really had free reign to, if desired, to manipulate the text. And what happened was, of course, on every regal, they would say, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael V'chag HaMatzos Mekadesh Yisrael V'chag HaSukkos Mekadesh Yisrael V'chag HaShavuos. However, it's a mouthful, because that means the one who composes the machzor, the one who prints the machzor, he has to write 3 different areas. It's too complicated. So what he did was, he wrote on the side V'Hazmanim, and hopefully you remember which Zman we're talking about, whether it's Pesach, whether it's Shavuos, or whether it's Sukkos. And the proof is, says the Torah Temimah and the Baruch Sha'amar, we say Mekadesh Yisrael v'Yom HaZikaron on Rosh Hashanah, or v'Yom HaKippurim. So why wouldn't we say B'chag HaMatzos, B'chag Shavuos, B'chag HaSukkos? And he therefore says the correct nusach should be every Yom Tov you should conclude with that particular Yom Tov. And he says the proof's in the pudding. He says in the bracha of the Haftorah, how do we conclude? Ala Torah Chag HaMatzos hazeh shenosat alon lechavos svaras alisasad nosim lechavos svaras ala koshem lachem baruch ma'aseh svaras shmovigo tomelim baruch atah Hashem mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. Well, that's what we do. But if you look at Masechta Sofrim, it says that you should say mekadesh Yisrael, not v'hazmanim, mekadesh Yisrael v'yom Chag Pesach, or V'chag HaShavuos, V'chag HaSukkos. So clearly, the correct thing to do is not to refer to all the Zmanim in general, but to say the specific Yom Tov. However, very interestingly, in the Sefer Nefesh Harav of Rav Hershel Schachter, he brings on page Kuf Pei Beis to page Kuf Pei Gimel, and I saw this in a new Sefer, a beautiful Sefer, Imrei Baruch of Harav Baruch Simon Shlita. He says that his Rabbi, Rabbi Yashav Soloveitchik, did not agree with the Torah Temimah, and in fact he personally spoke to the Torah Temimah and expressed his disagreement with him, that no, the correct nusach should be Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. And that is because, in Rav Soloveitchik's view, each one of the Yomim Tovim does not have independent Kedushas Hayoim, but rather they are part of one entity of Kedusha, namely something called Yom Tov, that when Yom Tov comes out in the spring, it is called Pesach, and when Yom Tov comes out in the Yemei HaOmer, it's called Shavuos. When it comes out in the harvest, it's called Sukkos. But it's not inherently a different wavelength of Kedusha. Rosh Hashanah is Kedusha b'fnei atzmai. Yom Kippur is Kedusha b'fnei atzmai. But the Shalosh Regalim, it's one Kedusha, depending on when it falls out. Falls out springtime, it's Pesach. Shavuos time is called Shavuos. But again, this is the idea that it seemed to me would be proper idea that we see from the whole Nusach HaTfilah, that there is an entity called Shalosh Regalim, and therefore, aside from the fact that we are now on Chag Pesach, I think it is imperative for a Jew to appreciate that we're now at a Zman called Moyed. This is a time that we meet with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a triannual, 3-time-a-year meeting. It's expressed in different names at different times of the year. And Rav Soloveitchik says the proof is that the Gemara Rosh Hashanah Daled Amud Aleph Daled Amud Beis brings, according to one opinion, that the Isser of Baal Ta'acher is only when the 3 Regalim pass Kesidron. Why is Baal Ta'acher only when the 3 Regalim pass Kesidron? What do the 3 Yom Tovim have to do with each other? Each Yom Tov is a Yom Tov B'fnei Atzei. No, there is a concept of Zman, Zmanim, Vehazmanim, Moyadim, Shalosh Regalim. So aside from the fact that there is a specific entity to each Yom Tov, the 3 Regalim are part of one entity that we're saying holds up the Kisei HaKavod, and Hashem's glory is manifest to the world. I believe the Sefer HaIkrim says the Shalosh Regalim testify to the 3 great principles: Pesach to Hashgacha Pratis, Shavuos to Torah Min HaShamayim, and Sukkos also upholds the great principle of Hashem's existence. So there's a concept that the 3 of them together create one particular entity. Based on this, Rav Hershel Schachter offers a tremendous chiddush, which is not agreed upon by most of the poskim. Namely, he says that if during the Shalosh Regalim you omit on Pesach some of the psukim of Sukkos or some of the psukim of Shavuos, maybe you would not be Yotzei Kriyas HaTorah, because the psukim that are read about all Shalosh Regalim are critical for each one of the Shalosh Regalim. So this is not agreed upon by Rav Ephraim Zalman Margos in the Shar Ephraim, because he brings that if, let's say, the 5th Aliyah on Sukkos, you did not read the psukim of Chag HaSukkos, and then you already made the bracha afterwards, he says you have to take out the Sefer Torah again because you didn't read the psukim of Sukkos. But clearly, this is only a diyun, this is only a question if on Sukkos you didn't read the psukim of Sukkos. But if, let's say, on one of the other, if you omitted some of the other psukim, the psukim of Pesach or psukim of Shavuos on Sukkos, that would not be an issue b'diavad. So it seems like the poskim do not agree with this chiddush, although this idea and this concept that the Shalosh Regalim are considered an entity in them of themselves, and they have to be referred to in the tefillos of all the Shalosh Regalim, is certainly substantiated by our nusach of Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim, and as we mentioned, from the fact that by all Shalosh Regalim we refer to Ata v'chartanu mikol ha'amim, ahavta isanu v'ratzi sabanu. Wishing everyone a good Moed and a good Yom Tov, Moyadim v'Zmanim l'sasain.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.